The security feed from that evening was meant to be wiped clean, erased like a bad memory. But some truths are etched in something deeper than magnetic tape. When the four men, moving with the unnatural synchronicity of a wolf pack, stepped into the hushed elegance of Boston's The Sovereign restaurant, they saw their target as a solitary, unsuspecting gazelle. Alistair Finch, the reclusive architect of the digital age and CEO of Finch Analytics, was a man of algorithms and code, not of blood and bone. They had charted his routines, compromised his driver, and timed their arrival for the lull between the main course and dessert. They had calculated every variable, that is, except the young woman clearing his bread plate. To them, she was part of the decor, a ghost in a starched white apron, notable only for the quiet efficiency of her movements. They were catastrophically wrong. 7 minutes later, Boston PD would swarm the scene to find the billionaire unharmed, staring in disbelief at four highly paid professionals incapacitated on a floor of Persian rugs and shattered porcelain. This is the story of Ilara Vance, the woman they never saw coming. The late autumn rain fell in a steady, mournful rhythm against the tall arched windows of the Sovereign. Inside, the air was a carefully curated symphony of scents, beeswax from the polished mahogany, aged leather from the banquettes, and the rich, earthy perfume of black truffle risotto. Ilara, or Ellie as the other staff called her, moved through it all with a practiced grace that bordered on invisibility. She adjusted the knot of her apron, the simple fabric a comforting weight, a uniform for a life she had meticulously constructed out of anonymity. It was a far cry from the life she'd fled, a world of encrypted signals and the cold, blue light of a monitor in a windowless room deep beneath the Virginia countryside. There, she hadn't been Ellie, the waitress who remembered that the woman at table 7 preferred her water without ice. She had been Analyst Vance, call sign Oracle, a prodigy who could see patterns in the static of global data streams that others missed. A mistake, a single misread pattern, had cost a man his life and sent her running into this self-imposed exile. Now, she decoded dinner orders, not diplomatic cables. She predicted a diner's need for a fresh napkin, not a terrorist cell's next move. She was nobody. It was safer that way. "Ellie, table 12 wants to see the dessert cart," hissed Mr. Abernathy, the floor manager, a man whose ambition had curdled into a permanent state of petty resentment. "Right away, Mr. Abernathy," she replied, her voice soft, deferential. The mask was heavy, but she had worn it for 2 years. It was almost a second skin. She turned towards table 12, the most coveted seat in the house, nestled in a secluded alcove that offered both privacy and a commanding view of the dining room. Its sole occupant was Alistair Finch. Anyone who followed the pulse of the modern world knew his face. At 42, he possessed a sharp, restless intelligence that made him look perpetually dissatisfied. His company, Finch Analytics, had developed Prometheus, a predictive AI that was revolutionizing everything from global shipping logistics to national security. He was worth more than most small countries, and tonight he looked like he bore the weight of all of them. He was dining alone, as he often did. No fawning entourage, no beautiful distraction. Even his security was discreet to the point of near absence. A single, broad-shouldered man in a plain suit sat at the bar, nursing a club soda, a good 60 feet away. Ellie approached the table, her movements fluid and unobtrusive. "Would you care for coffee, Mr. Finch?" Alistair didn't look up from the tablet he was stabbing at with a stylus. His focus was absolute, a bubble of concentration she was hesitant to pop. "Just water. And leave the pitcher." His voice was clipped, dismissive. Ellie retrieved a crystal pitcher of chilled water, her hands steady. As she poured the water into his glass, her eyes, honed by years of searching for the anomalous detail, did their habitual sweep of the room. It was a quiet Wednesday, an elderly couple celebrating an anniversary, their hands intertwined over a half-eaten crème brûlée. A trio of lawyers from a nearby firm, their voices a low drone of billable hours. Then the grand oak door swung open. A gust of cold, damp air swept in, making the candles on the tables dance wildly. 4 men entered. For the space of a single heartbeat, Ellie went utterly still. It wasn't their attire. They wore expensive, well-tailored suits that fit the restaurant's opulent aesthetic. It was their economy of motion. They didn't pause to consult the maître d'. Their eyes didn't roam the room, admiring the decor. They moved in a fluid, predatory diamond formation, their spacing perfect, their hands unnaturally relaxed, yet never far from the jackets of their coats. Their collective gaze was fixed on a single coordinate in the vast room. Table 12. Alistair Finch. A familiar, icy jolt shot through Ellie's veins. It was the feeling of a system being breached, of a threat vector being opened. For 2 years, her every instinct had screamed, flight. Blend in, disappear, become wallpaper. She glanced at Alistair. He was still engrossed in his tablet, oblivious, a king in his castle, unaware the walls were about to come down. She looked towards the bar. His bodyguard, a man named Harris, had noticed them. He was rising slowly from his stool, his hand moving towards his jacket. He was good, but he was one man, and he was too far away. The lead intruder, a man with a chillingly calm demeanor and a thin, white scar bisecting his left eyebrow, moved with brutal efficiency. As Harris's hand dipped inside his coat, the man with the scar produced a pistol fitted with a suppressor. The sound was a pair of dull coughs. Phut, phut, easily lost in the clatter of silverware from the kitchen. Harris crumpled behind the bar, a splash of dark red staining the polished brass footrail. It happened in less than 3 seconds. The low hum of the restaurant died, replaced by a vacuum of stunned silence. A woman at a nearby table let out a small, questioning gasp. Most diners hadn't processed what they'd seen. But Ellie knew. This wasn't a robbery. This was a targeted, professional hit. The 4 men stepped over the threshold into the main dining room, their movements now purposeful and swift. They were closing on the alcove, on the billionaire who was finally looking up, the code on his screen replaced by a dawning, mortal confusion in his steel-grey eyes. Ellie was standing right beside him, the heavy crystal water pitcher still in her hand. "Run!" screamed every survival instinct she had honed. Drop the pitcher, melt into the kitchen, vanish into the alley. You are Ellie the waitress. You serve people. You don't save them. She looked at Alistair Finch's face. He was frozen, a genius processing a problem for which he had no algorithm. He looked utterly, terrifyingly alone. Ellie took a slow, deliberate breath. Not tonight. "Mr. Finch, get down," Ellie said. Her voice was no longer the soft, airy tone of a server. It was a low, urgent command, stripped of all pleasantry, sharp and hard as chipped flint. "What?" Alistair blinked, his gaze shifting from the approaching men to the waitress he had barely acknowledged all evening. "Down. Now." Ellie didn't wait for compliance. She hooked her fingers into the lapel of his ridiculously expensive suit and yanked him sideways. He tumbled out of the chair with a grunt of surprise, just as the first bullet meant for his chest hissed through the air, shattering the water glass he'd been about to reach for. The sharp crack of the glass broke the spell. Screams erupted. Diners scrambled under tables. The lawyers at the nearby table overturned their chairs in a panic. The 4 men were closing the distance, their professionalism momentarily fractured by the unexpected intervention. The leader, scar brow, raised his weapon again. "Take the target. Neutralize the help." Ellie shoved Alistair under the heavy oak table. "Stay flat. Do not make a sound." She rose to her feet, placing herself between him and the attackers. She had no weapon. She was armed with a water pitcher and 2 years of repressed analytical fury. The first man, a mountain of muscle who moved with surprising speed, reached the alcove. He saw her not as a threat, but an obstacle. He aimed his pistol at her chest. "Move, girl." Ellie didn't move back. She moved forward. As his finger tightened on the trigger, she pivoted on the ball of her foot. A dancer's move. With her left hand, she slapped the barrel of his gun just enough to send the bullet wide, where it buried itself in a plush velvet curtain. Simultaneously, her right hand, gripping the base of the heavy water pitcher, swung in a tight, vicious arc. The sound was a sickening, wet crunch as a quart of glass and water connected with the man's temple. He dropped without a sound, a felled ox. Before his gun could clatter to the floor, Ellie snatched it from his limp hand. She didn't fire. The risk of hitting a civilian was too high. With practiced economy, she ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and hurled the empty weapon at the second attacker's face. He flinched instinctively, raising a hand to ward off the flying object. That half-second was a lifetime. Ellie vaulted over the corner of the table, her apron catching the air. She wasn't fighting. She was problem-solving with kinetic force. She landed in front of the second man as he was recovering his balance. He threw a clumsy, powerful punch. Ellie ducked under it, her hand darting out to a neighboring, now-abandoned table. She didn't grab a steak knife. She grabbed the cast-iron pepper grinder, a hefty, foot-long cylinder of wood and steel. She brought it up in a brutal, two-handed jab, not to his head, but to the soft, vulnerable spot just below his sternum. The air exploded from his lungs in a choked gasp. As he doubled over, she brought the grinder down sharply on the back of his neck. He collapsed into a heap. Alistair Finch, peering from under the tablecloth, watched in stunned silence. The quiet, efficient woman who had served him lukewarm coffee for months was dismantling a team of trained killers with a ferocity that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. The remaining two, Scarborough and the fourth man, finally understood. This wasn't going according to plan. They weren't dealing with a civilian. They paused, recalibrating, creating distance. Scarborough holstered his pistol and drew a telescopic baton, snapping it open with a flick of his wrist. He recognized the futility of shooting at a target that moved so fast and used the environment as a shield. "Who the hell are you?" he growled, advancing slowly. Ellie ripped off her apron and tossed it aside. She rolled her shoulders, a series of small, sharp cracks echoing in the alcove. She held the pepper grinder in a two-handed grip, like a medieval mace. "I'm the person who knows you use a modified Zastava M57 pistol, which means you're likely ex-Serbian Special Forces, probably from the Cobra unit," she said, her voice steady and cold. "And your partner's hesitation indicates he's the weak link. He's muscle, not a strategist." Scarborough's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't just fought them, she'd analyzed them. He lunged, a faint high followed by a vicious swing aimed at her knee. It was a classic disabling move. Ellie didn't retreat. She stepped into the attack, dropping to one knee. The baton whistled over her head. As it passed, she surged upward, driving the steel end of the pepper grinder into his exposed ribcage. He grunted as a rib cracked, but his training was too good. He spun, the baton catching her on the forearm in a backswing. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot up her arm. She stumbled back, crashing against the dessert cart she'd been summoned to earlier. "You're done!" Scarborough hissed, raising the baton for a final crushing blow. From under the table, Alistair, finally finding his voice, shouted, "Ellie!" Her eyes, momentarily clouded with pain, darted across the cart. Her gaze locked onto a small, silver object, a butane torch used for caramelizing sugar on crème brûlée. Her uninjured hand snatched it. As Scarborough brought the baton down, Ellie thumbed the ignition switch. A jet of blue flame roared to life. She thrust it forward, directly into his face. He screamed, a raw animal sound of shock and pain, dropping the baton to claw at his eyes. He was blinded, disoriented. Ellie dropped the torch, stepped inside his flailing arms, and delivered a single precise palm-heel strike to the point of his chin. His head snapped back, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Silence descended once more, thick and heavy, broken only by the distant sound of approaching sirens. The fourth man, the one she'd identified as the weak link, stood frozen near the kitchen entrance. He looked at his 3 fallen comrades. He looked at the woman in the simple black and white uniform, panting slightly, her arm already swelling, holding a pepper grinder like a scepter. He looked at the exit. He made the only logical choice. He turned and fled through the kitchen, disappearing into the night. Ellie didn't give chase. The primary threat was neutralized. She let the pepper grinder fall to the floor with a clatter. She turned back to the table and extended her good hand to the man hidden beneath it. "Mr. Finch," she said, her chest heaving. "The police will be here in less than 2 minutes. We need a coherent story, and we need it now." Alistair took her hand. It was trembling slightly, but strong. He crawled out from under the table, his bespoke suit covered in dust and spilled wine. He stared at the carnage, then at her. "Who? What? How?" Ellie grabbed a clean napkin from the table, her mind already racing, calculating variables, constructing a narrative. "My name is Ellie. I used to box a little. And you, Mr. Finch, are a very lucky man." The aftermath was a blur of flashing blue and red lights painting the street outside the Sovereign. The restaurant, now a secured crime scene, buzzed with the clipped professional tones of Boston PD detectives. Ellie sat on the bumper of an ambulance, a paramedic gently wrapping her bruised forearm. The shock blanket around her shoulders felt absurdly heavy. She had made a colossal error. In saving Alistair Finch, she had lit a beacon, and her carefully constructed world of shadows was about to be flooded with unwelcome light. "Miss Vance." The voice was weary, laced with the gravel of too many cigarettes and long nights. Ellie looked up into the face of Detective Harding, a homicide cop whose rumpled suit looked like he'd slept in it. He held up a small notebook. "Mind walking me through that again? The part where you, a 5'7" waitress, disabled 3 armed men with kitchen implements." Ellie adopted the persona she had rehearsed for this very possibility. The terrified victim, running on pure adrenaline. I don't know, Detective. It all happened so fast. They had guns. I panicked. My brother taught me some self-defense moves years ago. I guess I just got lucky." Harding's eyes, a pale, skeptical blue, narrowed. He gestured with his pen towards the restaurant. "Lucky. Miss Vance. One of them has a concussion, another a collapsed lung, and the third has second-degree burns on his face. That's not luck. That's technique. The way you cleared that man's weapon. That's not something your brother teaches you in the backyard." Ellie looked down at her hands, forcing a tremor into them. The adrenaline crash was real enough, at least. "I was scared for my life. I just wanted them to stop." "We ran your name," Harding pressed, his voice dropping. "Elara Vance, born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, moved to Boston 2 years ago, worked a few service jobs, not so much as a parking ticket. You're clean. Almost too clean. There's nothing on you before you were 24. It's like you just appeared." Ellie's heart hammered against her ribs. He was good. Too good. I was traveling, she lied, the story feeling flimsy even as she said it. Working odd jobs for cash, trying to find myself. And what did you find? Harding's voice was laced with sarcasm. An advanced degree in close quarters combat? Before she could formulate another lie, a crisp, authoritative voice cut through the damp night air. Detective. Harding turned. Alistair Finch stood there, flanked by two new security men who looked like they were carved from granite. He had refused medical attention, but a dark bruise was forming on his cheek where he'd hit the floor. His suit was ruined, but his presence was undiminished. He radiated an aura of absolute power. "Mr. Finch," Harding said, his posture straightening. "Just getting a statement from the witness." "You're interrogating the woman who saved my life," Alistair corrected him, his tone leaving no room for argument. He stepped between Harding and Ellie, creating a protective barrier. "She is a hero. She is also clearly in shock. Your questions can wait." "With all due respect, sir, her story doesn't add up. Her skill set is anomalous." "I'm not concerned with her story, Detective. I'm concerned with the fact that a professional hit team nearly executed me in one of this city's finest restaurants." Alistair's voice was dangerously quiet. "A failure of intelligence for which, I imagine, the Commissioner will want answers. Miss Vance will be coming with me. My personal physician will see to her injuries." Harding's jaw tightened. "I can't let you take a material witness from a crime scene." "You can," Alistair said, pulling out his phone. "Or I can make a call to the mayor's office and discuss the city's lax security measures for its most prominent business leaders. I'm sure the media would be very interested in that conversation. Your choice." It was a blatant display of power, and it worked. Harding looked from Alistair's cold, unblinking stare to Ellie's carefully constructed mask of frightened innocence. He knew a losing battle when he saw one. "Fine," Harding ground out, "but she's not to leave the city. We'll be in touch, Miss Vance." Alistair turned to Ellie, his expression unreadable. He offered her his arm. "Come. My car is here." Ellie hesitated. Going with Alistair Finch was jumping from the frying pan into the fire. He was smarter than Harding, with infinitely more resources, but staying meant more questions, more digging, and an inevitable unraveling of her entire existence. She took his arm. His grip was firm, steadying. "Thank you, Mr. Finch," she said quietly. "Alistair," he corrected her, as he led her to a waiting, armored sedan that seemed to absorb the light around it. "And for the record," he added, his voice a low murmur meant only for her, "I don't believe my brother taught me story for a second." The interior of the armored Maybach was a silent, leather-scented cocoon, sealing them off from the chaos of the street. Ellie leaned her head back, the adrenaline finally giving way to a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Alistair sat opposite her, not speaking, just watching her with an unnerving intensity, his grey eyes like scanners pulling her apart layer by layer. "You can drop me at my apartment," she said, as the car glided through the glistening Boston streets. "It's in the North End." "I know," Alistair said. He tapped a command into a screen that rose silently from the center console. A file appeared, displaying her face, her address, her falsified work history. "My head of data security pulled your employee file from the restaurant server 30 minutes ago. Ilara Vance. Social security number ending in 8842. It's a ghost number, isn't it? Valid on the surface, but it doesn't connect to a birth certificate or any federal records." Ellie remained silent, her gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window. The game was up. "My company, Ellie, deals in data, in patterns. We find needles in global haystacks. It took my AI less than 5 minutes to cross-reference your identity. The real Ilara Vance was a librarian from Scranton who died of an aneurysm 3 years ago. You've been living in her shadow. He leaned forward, the muted cabin lights casting sharp angles on his face. So I'll ask you again. Who are you? Are you corporate espionage? Sent to get close to me? Was tonight an elaborate theatre to gain my trust? A dry, humorless laugh escaped Ellie's lips. Theatre? You think I would orchestrate a scenario that involved a cracked rib and a high probability of getting shot in the face? She gestured to her heavily wrapped arm. If I worked for your competitors, Mr. Finch, I would have let them kill you. It would have been far less complicated. His eyes searched hers, looking for the lie, the tell. Then why? Why risk your life and your anonymity? For me? Because they were going to execute you in cold blood, she said simply. And I decided I didn't want to watch that happen. It was a tactical error. One I'm already regretting. The car slowed, pulling to the curb a block from her building, an old brick tenement that had seen better days. This is far enough, she said, reaching for the door handle. Thank you for the ride. Wait. Alistair was out of the car before she was, following her onto the wet pavement. The rain began to soak through his jacket. You can't go back there. The man who escaped, he saw you. He knows you're not just a waitress. They'll come back to clean up their loose ends. You're a liability. I know, she said, turning to face him. Which is why I have a bag packed and a new identity ready to go. By sunrise, Ellie Vance will cease to exist. Again. Stop running, he said, his voice raw with an urgency that surprised them both. Work for me. Ellie stared at him, the rain dripping from her hair onto her face. I'm not a bodyguard. I'm not looking for a bodyguard, he shot back. Harris, my head of security, was one of the best, and he was taken out in seconds. Someone on my staff leaked my location tonight. My inner circle is compromised. I don't know who to trust. He took a step closer. But I know what I saw tonight. You don't just react. You analyze. You anticipate. You see the whole board. You said you made a tactical error. Who talks like that? I don't need a soldier, Ellie. I need a strategist. I need an oracle. The word hit her like a physical blow, a ghost from a past she had buried. He couldn't know. It was a coincidence, a lucky guess, but it struck a nerve deep inside her. I can give you more than money, he continued, sensing her hesitation. I can give you a fortress. Finch Analytics has the most sophisticated identity-shielding technology on the planet. We can build you a new life, a real one, layered so deep that no one can ever find you again. A permanent solution. No more running. The offer was intoxicating. A life without constantly looking over her shoulder. A life where she could be more than a ghost. But it meant stepping back into the world she'd fled. It meant trusting this man. I have one condition, she said. Name it. I work with you, not for you. I'm not your employee. I'm a consultant. My analysis is unfiltered. My recommendations are not suggestions. You follow them without question. On matters of security, my word is final. Alistair studied her for a long moment, the rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. He saw not a waitress, but an equal. A queen on a chessboard he hadn't known existed. Deal, he said, extending his hand. She took it. As their hands clasped, a sudden blinding light erupted from her fourth-floor apartment window down the block. It was followed a split second later by a deafening roar that shook the street. The window blew outward in a shower of glass and a plume of fire and smoke. The shockwave slammed into them, staggering them. Ellie reacted without thinking, shoving Alistair down behind a parked car as debris rained onto the pavement. Car alarms shrieked up and down the block. She looked up at the burning hole where her life used to be, her face grim in the flickering firelight. "They didn't just come back to clean up," she said, her voice tight with fury. "They came to erase the entire file." Alistair stared at the inferno, his face pale with shock. He looked at Ellie, who was already scanning the rooftops across the street, her eyes narrowed, searching for a sniper's nest, an observer. "Get in the car," she commanded his driver. She pulled Alistair to his feet and pushed him into the back seat, diving in after him. "Go. Get us to your primary residence, now." As the sedan sped away, leaving the fire and the sirens behind, Alistair finally spoke, his voice a shaken whisper. "You were right." Ellie leaned her head back against the seat, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. "They're thorough," she said, "which means they're well-funded and highly motivated. This is about more than a simple corporate takeover." She turned to him, her eyes burning with a cold fire he'd never seen before. "So tell me, Alistair, who wants you dead this badly?" Alistair's penthouse was a sterile sanctuary of glass and steel overlooking the Charles River, a fortress of technology and paranoia. Ellie, however, treated it like a hostile environment. For the first hour, she ignored Alistair and his offer of a drink, instead conducting a meticulous sweep of the apartment. She used a thermal imager and a frequency detector from a hidden safe in his study, her movements precise and economical. Alistair watched, fascinated, as this woman, who hours ago was clearing his table, moved through his home like a seasoned intelligence operative. "The apartment is clean," she finally announced, setting the devices down on a massive granite countertop in the kitchen. She accepted the glass of whiskey he offered her, downing half of it in a single, clean swallow. The liquor did little to warm the icy knot of anger in her stomach. "Now, we talk. Everything. Start with your enemies." "The list is long," Alistair said, leaning against the counter. The events of the night had stripped him of his usual arrogance, leaving behind a weary, focused intensity. "But there's only one person with the resources, the motive, and the personal hatred to orchestrate something like this: Silas Croft." "Your former partner," Ellie stated. It wasn't a question. She had done her homework on Finch Analytics when she'd first identified Alistair as a regular patron. It was her nature to know the terrain. "My former mentor," Alistair corrected, his voice laced with an old bitterness. "We built this company together from my dorm room at MIT. I was the architect, the coder. He was the visionary, the salesman. But as the company grew, his vision turned to greed. He wanted to sell our predictive analytics to the highest bidder: foreign governments, private military contractors, anyone. He saw Prometheus not as a tool to create order, but as a weapon to be sold. I refused. The board sided with me. I bought him out. He spent the last 5 years trying to destroy me from the outside. What's the end game? A hostile takeover after you're dead?" "It's bigger than that," Alistair said, walking over to a floor-to-ceiling window that displayed the glittering Boston skyline. 2 months ago, we signed an exclusive, highly classified contract with the Department of Defense, Project Chimera. We're integrating Prometheus into the NORAD defense grid. It's a generational leap in threat detection. If Silas could get his hands on the source code, or even the access credentials, he wouldn't just be a billionaire. He'd hold the keys to the kingdom. He could sell them to any rogue state. It would be the single greatest intelligence breach in American history. Ellie felt a cold dread settle over her. This wasn't corporate warfare. This was a matter of national security. The world she had run from had just found her. "So the hit wasn't just to remove you. It was a precursor to a data heist. Precisely. With me gone, my second-in-command would take over. A good man, but weak. Silas could pressure him, blackmail him, break him. He needs me out of the picture to get to the code. Then our next move is to find proof linking Silas to the attack, Ellie said, her mind shifting into analytical mode. The man who, the escapee, was their only tether to the truth. In the sterile quiet of Alistair's penthouse, a silence broken only by the whisper of the ventilation system and the distant hum of the city, that tether felt terrifyingly fragile. For 48 hours, the space ceased to be a home and became a crucible. Coffee went cold in forgotten mugs. Sleep became a theoretical concept. Alistair had granted her access, not just to the public-facing analytics of his company, but to the core of Prometheus itself. It was like being handed the keys to a god's mind. He watched her, a phantom at the edge of her concentration as she plunged into that digital ocean. He had expected a technician, a hacker. What he witnessed was something else entirely. She didn't command the system. She communed with it. Her fingers moved across the holographic interface, not with the staccato rhythm of a coder, but with the fluid, intuitive grace of a conductor guiding an orchestra of pure data. She wasn't searching for a man. She was searching for the ripples his fear would leave on the fabric of the world. He's a professional, Alistair had argued on the first night, his voice raspy with exhaustion as he watched her build a complex probability matrix based on psychological stress indicators. He'll go to ground, cash only, no contact with his old life. He'll be a ghost. Every ghost has a haunt, Ellie had replied, her eyes reflecting the cascading lines of code, never leaving the display. Professionals are still human. They have anchors, habits, addictions. Fear doesn't make them disciplined. It makes them revert to their baseline programming. We're not looking for the man he is now. We're looking for the man he was before he took your contract. She built a profile not from what he was doing, but from what he was not doing. He wasn't using credit cards, so she modeled cash flow corridors out of the city. He wasn't using his known phones, so she hunted for burner activations pinging off towers near his last known location. He wasn't contacting known associates, so she built a predictive model of his vices. Gambling, prostitution, narcotics. She fed Prometheus every scrap of data from his life before the attack. A dishonorable discharge for theft, 2 failed marriages, a crippling debt to a loan shark in Dorchester. He's not running to family, she murmured late on the second day, a sudden, chilling certainty in her voice. Alistair, who had been tracing a dead-end lead on the man's sister in Revere, looked up. Family is a complication. It's leverage. He knows that. He's running to an addiction. Something that will numb the terror of being hunted by both us and his former employer. She pointed to a cluster of data points on the screen. He was a gambler. Not a good one. He chased his losses. He craves the one place where chaos is king, where he can believe for a few hours that he has control. Her fingers flew across the console, pulling data from casino security feeds, cross-referencing them with facial recognition software running on a private, off-the-books network. He won't go to a licensed casino. Too many cameras, too much federal oversight. He'll go somewhere dirty, somewhere he can buy in with cash and disappear into the smoke. Alistair watched, mesmerized, as she narrowed the search. 12 illegal poker rooms and back-alley casinos. She discarded them one by one. Too small, too insular. They'd spot a stranger. Then, a hit. A warehouse in the Seaport district, converted into an unsanctioned, high-stakes gambling den for the city's underworld. It was run by a syndicate with a strict policy of anonymity and a stronger policy against external interference. "There," she said, her voice a low thrum of victory. "He'll feel safe there, anonymous. He'll burn through his blood money, hoping for a miracle hand that will let him vanish forever." "We can't just walk in there," Alistair said, the sheer audacity of it dawning on him. "It's a fortress." "We don't have to," Ellie replied, a faint, dangerous smile touching her lips for the first time in days. She turned to face him, her eyes clear and sharp. "You're Alistair Finch. You own half the commercial real estate in that district. I'm willing to bet you own the building next door." He checked. He did. "You're going to call the fire marshal?" she continued, her plan unfolding with crystalline logic. "You're going to report an anonymous tip about faulty wiring and illegal chemical storage in that warehouse. You're going to trigger an immediate, no-questions-asked emergency inspection. It will create panic, chaos, and in the chaos, our ghost will be flushed out into the open." She stood, stretching the kinks from her back. "I'll be waiting for him in the alley." Alistair looked from the cold, hard data on the screen to the woman standing before him. For his entire adult life, he had believed in the elegant purity of algorithms. He had built an empire on the premise that, with enough data, anything could be predicted, anything could be controlled. But this woman, she was something else. She was the algorithm made flesh, a living embodiment of predictive analysis, but with an element he could never code, a deep, visceral understanding of human frailty. "You're not going alone," he said, the words leaving his mouth before his logical mind could object. "This is my war." Ellie held his gaze, and for a moment he saw a flicker of the lonely analyst she had been, the oracle who saw the world as a set of problems to be solved from a distance. "The protocol, Alistair. You do what I say." "The protocol has changed," he replied, his voice unyielding. "I'm not the target anymore. I'm your asset. Use me." The alley behind the warehouse stank of stale beer and desperation. It was a narrow canyon of brick and rusted fire escapes, the only exit for a panicked rat leaving a sinking ship. Ellie stood in the deepest shadows, the cold metal of a Sig Sauer P320, a familiar weight in her hand. Alistair was 200 yards away, parked in an unassuming sedan, acting as her eyes, monitoring the emergency services response on his phone. The first sirens were a distant wail that grew into a piercing scream. Then came the shouting from inside the warehouse, a wave of panicked voices as the fire marshal's team, flanked by a deliberately overwhelming police presence, made their entrance. A minute later, the back door burst open. Men in expensive suits and cheap tracksuits poured out, their faces a mixture of anger and fear. They scattered like cockroaches in the light. Ellie remained perfectly still, her breathing slow and even. Her eyes scanned each face, comparing it against the image burned into her memory. He was the 10th man out, hoodie pulled low, a gym bag clutched in his hand, his eyes darting wildly. He didn't run. He walked, trying to blend in, to become just another shadow in the urban decay. He passed her position without a glance. Ellie let him get 20 feet ahead before she stepped out of the darkness behind him. She didn't call his name. She didn't make a sound. She simply fell into step behind him, her soft-soled shoes whispering on the grimy pavement. He felt her presence before he heard it, a primal instinct screaming that he was being hunted. He stopped, his shoulders tensing. "Stefan," she said. Her voice was quiet, conversational, yet it cut through the night air like a shard of glass. He spun around, his hand diving inside his jacket. His eyes widened in recognition and pure, animal terror. He saw her face, the last thing he expected to see in this world. But he never cleared the leather. Ellie had already closed the distance. Her movements were a blur of brutal efficiency. Her left hand shot out and clamped down on his wrist, her thumb digging into the nerve cluster there, rendering his hand numb and useless. Her right hand brought the pistol up, not to his head, but pressed firmly against his lower abdomen. "A gut shot is a messy way to die, Stefan," she murmured, her voice a cold whisper against his ear. "It takes a long time. Now, you and I are going for a ride. You're going to walk to the black sedan at the end of this alley, and you're not going to make a sound. Nod if you understand." He nodded, a jerky, terrified motion. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the cold, heavy certainty of his own mortality. They didn't take him to another warehouse. That was a movie trope, inefficient and predictable. Alistair drove them to the sub-levels of the Finch Analytics Tower, a place of polished concrete, humming servers, and absolute silence. It was a sterile tomb, miles from the chaotic world above. They left Stefan in a glass-walled server maintenance room, tied not with rope, but with thick industrial zip ties to a steel chair. Ellie and Alistair stood outside, watching him on a monitor. The bravado was gone. He was just a man, cornered and broken. "Now for the confession," Alistair said, picking up a recording device. "He won't talk," Ellie countered, her arms crossed. "Not yet. He's more afraid of Silas Croft than he is of us. We can't just threaten him. We have to show him that Croft is the disease, and we are the only cure." She walked into the room. Stefan flinched as she approached. She didn't speak. She simply placed a tablet on the small table in front of him. On the screen was a live satellite feed of a small, neat house in Revere. A light was on in an upstairs window. "Your sister's house," Ellie said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Her name is Maria. She's a pediatric nurse. She works the night shift at Mass General, which is why she's still awake. She's probably reading. She likes historical fiction, doesn't she?" Stefan stared at her, his face ashen. "How?" "Silas Croft knows about her, Stefan," Ellie continued, ignoring his question. "He knows she's your only living relative, your anchor. He sees her not as a person, but as a loose end, a piece of leverage to be discarded. Right now, he thinks you're a ghost. But the moment he learns you've been compromised, that you've been captured, what do you think his first move will be? He'll sanitize the problem. He'll send a team to her house, and it will look like a robbery gone wrong. A tragic, random act of violence." She let the words hang in the sterile air. She was building a narrative of inevitable doom, a future he could see with horrifying clarity. Alistair stepped into the room, playing his part. He placed a second tablet next to the first. It displayed a complex financial chart. "This is you, Stefan. Or rather, the new you. A new identity, forged by the best system on the planet. A passport, a driver's license, a bank account with a starting balance of $250,000. Enough to disappear. Enough to start over, somewhere far from here. We can have it ready in an hour." He swiped the screen. A new image appeared. A plane ticket. One way, to Costa Rica. Departing from Logan in 3 hours. "Two futures, Stefan," Ellie said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "One ends with your sister's body being discovered by the morning paperboy. The other ends with you on a beach, watching the sunrise, a free man. The only thing standing between those two futures is what you tell us in the next 10 minutes. Everything you know about Silas Croft. The meetings, the money drops, the communications, the plan for Project Chimera." Stefan looked from the live feed of his sister's quiet, peaceful home to the image of the plane ticket. A ticket to a life he couldn't have imagined an hour ago. The conflict in his eyes was a raging war. Then something broke. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. The client. He called himself the Visionary. He began, his voice a choked whisper. The dam had broken. The confession poured out of him, a torrent of names, dates, and encrypted communication protocols. He spoke of Silas Croft's obsession with Alistair, his burning need to reclaim the company and seize control of Chimera. The restaurant attack was meant to be the final piece. With Alistair dead, a trusted mole inside the company, the head of network security, a man named Jennings, was supposed to use the ensuing chaos to access the system, using Alistair's stolen physical key and a set of biometric failsafes he'd spent a year creating. As Stefan spoke, Ellie's own tablet, linked to the Prometheus network, chimed with a high-priority alert. She glanced down. Her blood ran cold. "Alistair," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "He's not waiting. He's doing it now." On the screen was a schematic of the Finch Analytics server core, deep within the building. A single data stream, heavily encrypted but massive in size, was being siphoned from the Chimera project servers to an external, untraceable node. The transfer had been initiated 17 minutes ago. "That's impossible," Alistair breathed, staring at the screen. "Jennings can't bypass my final voice authorization. The system would lock him out." "He didn't bypass it," Ellie said, her mind connecting the dots with lightning speed. "He used a deepfake. He's been collecting samples of your voice for months, Alistair. Speeches, board meetings, phone calls. He built a perfect replica." She looked at the transfer progress bar. 87% complete. We have less than 5 minutes before the most advanced defense system on the planet belongs to Silas Croft. The attack on the restaurant wasn't a diversion for a future heist. It was the cover for the heist, happening in real time. While the city's attention was on a violent crime, the real crime was happening silently, floors above their heads. "Security!" Alistair roared into his comms. "Lock down the server core, level 44. Subdue Marcus Jennings, now!" There was a moment of static, then a calm, familiar voice responded. It was Jennings. "I'm afraid Mr. Finch is unavailable at the moment. All security is now under my direction. New orders from our new CEO." Silas. He wasn't just stealing the data. He was staging a coup. He's not just taking the code, Ellie realized, her eyes wide. He's taking the entire building. A heavy thud echoed from the hallway, followed by the sound of metallic clanging. The main doors to the sub-level were being sealed. They were trapped. "He's boxing us in," Alistair said, a grim understanding dawning on his face. "He's going to erase us along with the evidence." Ellie's gaze swept the room. Servers, power conduits, ventilation shafts. Her mind wasn't seeing a server room. It was seeing a battlefield. "He thinks he's trapped us in a tomb," she said, pulling a heavy-duty wire cutter from a maintenance panel. "He's forgotten who built it." She turned to Alistair, her eyes blazing with a fierce, cold light. "I need a schematic of the building's emergency power and ventilation systems, and I need to know the fastest way to get from here to the server core without using an elevator." Alistair was already pulling up the blueprints on his tablet. A grim smile touched his lips. "There's a service shaft. It's a straight shot up, 40 floors. It's never been used. It was designed for emergency heat dispersal from the core. It's a vertical wind tunnel." He looked at her. "It's suicide." "It's a shortcut," Ellie corrected him. She began cutting Stefan free. "You're coming with us," she told the terrified man. "You're our ticket past the first layer of security." The ascent was a nightmare of roaring wind, vibrating steel, and vertigo-inducing darkness. The emergency ventilation shaft was a vertical hell, a 40-story climb up a narrow service ladder with hurricane-force winds trying to rip them from their holds. But it led them past Silas's security cordon, depositing them in a maintenance corridor just outside the server core. The core itself was a cathedral of data, rows of humming black monoliths bathed in the cold, blue light of their own power. In the center, Marcus Jennings stood at a terminal, watching the final percentage points of the data transfer tick upward. Standing beside him, watching with an air of triumphant satisfaction, was a man Alistair hadn't seen in 5 years. Silas Croft. He was older, his hair silvered at the temples, but his eyes held the same predatory intelligence. "Alistair," Silas said, his voice smooth as silk, showing no surprise. "I knew you'd be too stubborn to simply die. You always did hate letting others finish your work." 2 heavily armed guards flanking him raised their rifles. "It's over, Silas," Alistair said, his voice steady despite his ragged breathing. "The moment that transfer completes, it's flagged by the DoD. They'll have this building surrounded in minutes. By the time they get here, the data will be gone, and you and your mysterious friend will have been tragically killed by my head of security during a psychotic break. Marcus was so distraught over your death, you see. A terrible, terrible tragedy." Silas smirked. "I, of course, will step in to stabilize the company in its time of crisis." 98%, Jennings announced, his eyes glued to the screen. Ellie had been silent, a shadow at Alistair's shoulder. She had analyzed the room in a single, sweeping glance. 2 guards, tactical gear, automatic weapons. Silas and Jennings, the non-combatants. 1 primary terminal, multiple emergency cutoffs. "Alistair," she whispered, so low only he could hear. "When I move, kill the master power conduit, the red panel on the far wall." Before Alistair could process the command, she moved. She shoved Stefan forward with a brutal cry. "Now!" Stefan stumbled into the open, a perfect distraction. The guard's attention shifted for a fraction of a second. It was all Ellie needed. She exploded from the corridor, not at the guards, but to the left, diving behind a server rack as bullets chewed the air where she had been. Alistair, acting on pure instinct, sprinted in the opposite direction, a desperate, suicidal run for the red panel. Silas screamed, "Stop him!" 1 guard turned to track Alistair. The other kept his rifle trained on the servers where Ellie had vanished. From behind the rack, a fire extinguisher arced through the air, crashing into the guard's helmet. He staggered back, disoriented. Ellie was on him in an instant, a phantom of controlled violence. She used his own rifle as a lever, twisting it to break his grip, and drove her elbow into his throat. He went down, gagging. The 2nd guard swung his rifle back towards her, but Alistair had reached the panel. He smashed the protective cover and slammed his hand down on the emergency cutoff. The world went dark. The roar of the servers died, replaced by an emergency klaxon and the blood-red glow of backup lighting. On the main terminal, the data transfer froze at 99%. "No!" Jennings shrieked in the dark. The remaining guard, blinded by the sudden change, fired wildly into the shadows. Ellie, using the strobing red lights as cover, closed the distance. The fight was short, brutal, and silent. It ended with the guard unconscious on the floor. In the pulsing red gloom, only 2 men were left standing, Alistair and Silas, facing each other across the silent, dead heart of their creation. "You never understood, Alistair," Silas hissed, his composure finally cracking. "Prometheus isn't a tool, it's power. Absolute power. It belongs to those with the vision to use it, not to hide it away with government contracts." "It was never yours to sell," Alistair said, his voice filled with a cold, weary finality. From the shadows, Ellie emerged, her face grim in the red light. Jennings was slumped at her feet, a zip tie around his wrists. The fight was over. A week later, the penthouse was quiet again. The city lights glittered below, a silent, indifferent ocean of stars. The news cycle had moved on, fed a sanitized story of a foiled corporate espionage plot. Silas Croft and Marcus Jennings were in federal custody, facing a litany of charges that would ensure they never saw the outside of a prison again. Project Chimera was secure. Alistair poured 2 glasses of a 25-year-old single malt. He handed one to Ellie. She was standing by the window, not looking at the city, but at her own reflection in the glass. She was no longer wearing the simple black and white of a waitress, but she wasn't wearing tactical gear either. She was in simple, comfortable clothes. She looked like herself. "I've been running an analysis," Alistair said, breaking the comfortable silence. He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "A cost-benefit analysis of the events of the last week. The data is inconclusive." She turned to him, a questioning look in her eyes. "By every metric I have ever valued," he continued, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "it was a catastrophic failure. My security was breached, my life was threatened, my company was nearly stolen, and a multi-billion-dollar defense contract was almost compromised. And yet," he paused, looking at her, "my entire operational paradigm was based on the assumption that the most valuable asset is predictable data. I was wrong. The most valuable asset is the one you can never quantify, the anomaly, the variable that changes the whole equation. I'm not a variable, Alistair," she said softly. "I'm a person." "I know," he said. "That's what I'm finally beginning to understand." He took a sip of his whiskey. "The government has been in touch. They want to debrief you. The director of the NSA mentioned your call sign. Oracle. They want you back, Ellie. They said you could name your price." Ellie looked down into her glass, watching the light play across the surface. For 2 years, she had lived in a prison of her own making, hiding from a world she was uniquely qualified to navigate. The events of the last week had shattered its walls. She was free, but the freedom was terrifying. She could go back. She could be the Oracle again, a ghost in the machine, a name on a classified file. Or she could be Ellie Vance, a person who had decided not to watch a man die. "What I did," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The mistake that made me run. I misread a pattern. I saw a threat that wasn't there, and my analysis led to an innocent man's death. I trusted the data more than my own instincts. I swore I would never make that mistake again." She finally looked up, her eyes meeting his in the reflection. "They don't want a person. They want a function, an oracle. They don't care about the cost." "And what do you want?" Alistair asked, his voice gentle. A slow smile spread across her face. It was the first genuine smile he had ever seen from her. It transformed her features, erasing the last traces of the haunted analyst and the hardened fighter. "I think," she said, "that I'm tired of working for people. I'm interested in a partnership." She raised her glass. "You have the resources. I have a particular skill set. There are a lot of patterns in the world that need a second look, a lot of equations that need a new variable." Alistair touched his glass to hers. The soft clink was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a contract being sealed, not with signatures and lawyers, but with a shared understanding. He was no longer just a man of algorithms, and she was no longer just a ghost on the run. "To new variables," he said. "To new variables," she agreed, and together they watched the sun begin to rise over the city. The world was still a chaotic, dangerous place. But for the first time in a very long time, neither of them had to face it alone.